This is Richard Hatch. You most likely know him from CBS's hit reality show, Survivor. He was the winner of Season 1, which when it aired in the summer of 2000, was such a smash, it was watched by over 51 million viewers. He was a character we hadn't really seen before in a reality show, on a show that was like no other. He was openly gay and decided to play much of the game in the nude. But most importantly, he understood the social experiment he was part of and played the game masterfully. He pioneered elements of the game that ultimately made it what it is today. But the show instead presented him as a villain. Fans and critics labeled him Machiavellian. When he appeared again on Survivor's first AllStars season, producers exploited an unfound allegation made against him to make him even more torrid. And then in 2006, the IRS came down on him for evading taxes on his $1 million winnings. He was convicted and served over 51 months in prison, one of the largest penalties on record for the amount he owed. The media used this and continued to label him a villain.
Well, now don't start with that, because there are other allegations in this, and it seems that there was clearly that he misused some charitable funds that were supposed to be dedicated to a charity he was involved with. So just hang on. We're good. We're out of time. Mr. McDonald,
the jury
thank you very
disagreed
much.
with you on that. You're welcome, Harry.
All right.
That was Richard Hatch's lawyer being shut down on the channel that Richard made millions for, while being accused publicly of something he was acquitted of. So it all begs the question of what really happened. Survivor producers and host Jeff Probst have spoken fondly of him over the years, inviting him back multiple times. However, for this year's first ever All Winners edition, host and executive producer Jeff Probst stated, "I didn't feel comfortable having him on the show and representing a show that is for families." Is Richard Hatch unsafe for families? Did CBS have something to hide? Was CBS throwing him under the bus? Is he a villain? Is he a criminal? I wanted to find out for myself, and Richard was gracious enough to chat with me and share his side of all of it. It's important to say that the opinions shared in this episode are just that, and they're ours alone. I urge each and every one of you to do your own homework before making any decisions. I'm Andy Signor, and this is Hugging the Cactus. To ensure you never miss a story, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to all alerts. It's the only way to ensure that YouTube will keep us in your feed. I'm here with Richard Hatch. Richard, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing great. Look, I'm a big Survivor fan, so this is an honor to talk to you, and I'm excited to tell your story because I just think people just aren't aware of what's happened to you. You are known for so many things, but before we get to all of that, I want to go back, even before Survivor. I didn't know you were enlisted in the Army. You've done so many odd jobs. Can you give me just a little bit of a background of where you came from and what you did even pre-Survivor?
Sure. Briefly, grew up in Newport, Rhode Island. Left town to go to college in Florida at Florida Institute of Technology. Kind of majored in marine biology and oceanography, which I loved. And then I thought, I don't want to ruin my passion. So I left there, moved back to Newport, enlisted in the Army, flew to Fort Bliss, Texas, started basic training. The commander there suggested that I ought to do more, and thought I should apply to West Point, United States Military Academy at West Point. I said, sure. I applied. I got in. I went to the USMAPS, the United States Military Academy Preparatory School in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and then on to the academy at West Point, where I had to make some decisions about whether or not I'd stay or leave. Being a gay guy in the Army in the 80s, really took some thought, because West Point was prestigious, good school, great folks. I made really good friends, but knew I needed to move on, particularly when the commander called me in his office and said, you're not really like the rest of us, are you?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. So I'm watching you on Survivor. You are a little bit different. Is that fair to say?
Oh, that's more than fair. Yeah. And I'm proud of it. You know, I don't mind being different. I don't want to. I have never aspired to be kind of like everyone. One of the things I pride myself on is being sufficiently aware of how I can make improvements, introspective enough to look around and say, what else can I do to do better?
You were touted as a villain on that show, but there's so much as we're learning it, and you get to there. You've never been a villain in your life, right?
No, I've never been a villain, but I enjoyed that moniker. When people thought I was the guy they loved to hate on Survivor, I came to a place relatively quickly where that was something I rolled with. the naked guy who people love to hate. It was not easy at first because on Survivor, I was thinking I was going to come home to, accolades, the MVP, like in football, which I don't watch, but, oh, wow, look what this guy did. I was disabused of that idea very quickly. But I'll go back real briefly. After West Point, I left, moved into Manhattan. I had really interesting opportunities. I ran the door at the Palladium for Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager, who used to own Studio 54. I was their VIP manager and personal driver. I did all kinds of things. I moved from there to Washington, D.C., started my own company as a corporate trainer and taught all over the country all kinds of topics related to communication skills and human interactions. My degrees in applied behavioral sciences and management. I've since gone on to get a master's in education and counseling, and I'm in a PhD program almost finished with in humanities. So, yeah, very interesting life.
Well, Survivor clearly became a big identifier for you and your career moving forward. And as we talk, I think there's several identifiers you've become known for. And I want to address them as we continue, because right or wrong, I feel some way you've been lucky to be identified as multiple things in your career, where most people would just be the Survivor guy. But you came into Survivor, and clearly all those experiences, those life experiences, paved the way to help you to pioneer the format of Survivor when you showed up. So let's talk about the Survivor experience, because that was sort of the biggest blip to start all the next steps in your career. You showed up to the show. How did you even hear about it? How did that happen?
Yeah, prior to even being on the show, all of that experience in my life enabled me to get on the show. So my mom first, I think, saw an ad that said something, and she called me and said, "They're doing a show just for you." I said, "Who?" She had no idea. But about a week later, a friend of mine from DC, Washington, DC, she emailed me and said, "CBS is doing a show just for you." I thought, that's weird. She doesn't know my mom, the same kind of thing. So I looked it up, and it was a show just for me. Because I love the outdoors, I love the hiking, the camping, all of that, but also the academic background in psychology, and that it was a social experiment. I loved all of it. I knew that it was something I would do happily. So I applied. That entailed an 18-page questionnaire. I knew thousands of people would apply, and I knew lots of people would be looking at those applications. So I addressed every question with that in mind. So they asked, who would you not want to be on the island with? And I said, morons and bigots and bores. Oh my. So all of my questions were designed to keep people's attention. And then my video was similar. It was segments of my life exposing who I really am.
Most people don't know that when they submit to a reality show. You got to do that. You got to know that anything you say, the producers are going to use to try and create havoc. So you knew going in, all right, I'm going to get their attention. I'm going to win this over. So you then clearly, was that a pretty immediate decision to get you on the show once they met you?
Well, no. In fact, I knew that that's what they would be interested in, but very quickly, almost instantaneously, in the first in-person interview in Boston, I recognized that people, as they sometimes are, were a little overwhelmed with who I was. And I could go in either direction. I could tone it down, or I could push and kind of be over the top. And I give people advice now when they apply, don't go over the top, because it gets thrown out. People don't. The casting department, if they can't feel that they've got a handle on who you are, then they toss the tape away. So I decided to go full bore. And so I literally started requiring the camera people who were interviewing me and the producers who were asking questions to stop saying, "if I win." If you say, "if I win" again, I'm leaving. I'm not answering the damn question. Get it together. I already told you I'm going to win the show. I was that ridiculous. I mean, but I was doing it intentionally, and they didn't understand that. That's one of the things I'm most proud of in this whole thing, is that all of those people, including Mark Burnett behind the show, selected me because they knew, and he wrote it in his book in real time, they knew I'd be voted off first because I was an arrogant prick, and they knew for certain I wouldn't go far. So I loved that I got it accurately, made a choice about how to proceed with it, and was selected because of how I chose.
It's funny because Survivor really is about arrogant pricks winning. For at least the longest time, that's sort of what Survivor is. It was sort of watching these people eat themselves, right? Lord of the Fly style. And so the show over the years has now attempted its best to like fix that so nice people can win. And it's been funny to watch the survival of the show and them trying to change it. But you really did pioneer and create that sort of attitude of the good guys don't always win. You got to play. It's outwit, outlast. You got to get all those things, and you sometimes got to be dirty to get there, but it's a game. And so I watched you do an interview, which you can talk about, but people saw you as this villain and this prick because you were being honest to the audience. You were telling them what you were doing, but then the audience took that as you being, a saboteur and a jerk, but that was the whole point of why you did that. So it's funny and frustrating to me to see these people misread what we were doing, because we loved the show because of you. Because you were in on it and telling us, it made the show. And that because I remember that summer, it was event television. People forget how massive Survivor Season 1 was. It was astronomical. Every week, it was water cooler talk. Everyone was tuning in. You don't have that nowadays. So, I mean, you were in on it. Is that safe to say?
No, I wasn't in on it. And I take issue with you saying I was a prick and all of those things. I know where you're coming from. Just let me finish. The things that I was doing intentionally for the audience. So you're right. I was speaking to the audience in a way that I thought they would appreciate, but I misunderstood what was happening in real time. In real time, people didn't get the show. It took many years, and in fact, still don't now. 20 years later, 40 seasons, many players and many viewers still don't understand that it's not about somebody being a prick. That's not who I am. It's about understanding the game. Outwit, outplay, outlast, like you said, requires a certain level of interaction that you wouldn't use in real life necessarily. And I was prepared not only to do whatever it took, I was prepared to share that with viewers in a way they were unprepared for. Quick story, Rosie O'Donnell had us on her show, her talk show, after we finished and the show was airing. And she hated me. She hated me terribly because of who she thought I was, because she was a big fan of the show, but didn't understand it either. And she gave everyone who was there, all of us, she gave each of us a car, except me, she gave a box of rice. I mean, it translated immediately into people not knowing what to do with me because of what they saw me do. Fascinating to me as a person, an observer of humanity, and have always been intrigued by people. Wow, here this was the most interesting thing that had ever happened in my life, and to watch it unfold the way it did, I could never have predicted.
You're right. You weren't a prick to anybody. You just played the game. You played the game, and in order to play the game, you got to turn on people. And people are falling in love with these other contestants, and Sean and his alphabet strategy, and how dare you turn. All these stupid things that they were doing, you were just wise and knew how to turn. So that's what I mean by being a prick. So thank you for correcting me. I didn't mean that. But the audience saw you as a prick because you were going against the people they liked. And they don't understand, like, well, that's how you have to play this game. You were ahead of the curve with everybody. But it's interesting because this game is a social experiment. And some have won the game trying to be nice. You immediately went there, but I think that was how you have to play that game. Do you have any second thoughts, or sort of look back and say, well, maybe I could have attempted to be nicer and not turn on the people? Is there any way to win Survivor that way?
No, and in fact, it isn't about nice. And now, all these years later, I have an enormous amount of data, and so fans write to me still to this day all the time saying, I'd never seen your season. I just watched it. What the heck were they talking about? You being a villain. You're amazing. You started this. They're still using that. I can't believe the way you played. How did you know to do that? Those kinds of comments help me understand just how detached from what was going on people really were. They did not get it, and many still don't. But if you look back now, you won't think I'm a villain because you understand as a fan the show a little bit more. I I don't have any regrets about the way I treated people because I treated them well. That's part of why I got voted the winner at the end. People respected the way I played the game, and I wasn't stupid enough to play it the way Russell does, for example. That's some other game. That's not Survivor. Playing Survivor requires that you be somewhat of a decent human being while chopping off the heads of those around you. It's a challenge.
Chopping off the heads around you makes them very angry at you, and then that creates sort of the, well, you're a villain, and people misconstrue what the game is. I applaud your efforts. You went on to win that season, and I remember watching, I was just surprised, as I think most were, that you didn't lose right away. And I say that with love because I was like, they're never going to keep him around. Yeah. You chose to be nude the whole time, which you got a lot of flack for, but I thought was brilliant because there was no rule against you couldn't be nude. The show's producers could tell you to put your clothes on if it was a problem, but you chose, you know what, I'm going to do this because it's going to throw everyone else off. It's going to create more. So tell me about that decision to go nude. Was there any discussions about, no, you can't do this? Were they just sort of shocked and went with it? What happened there?
Oh, gosh, yeah. There were all kinds of issues related to my being naked. First of all, there were other folks who were naked, too. They were sitting around the campfire naked at night sometimes, etc. But they chose my naked story for a reason, probably because I was more naked more often than others. And I get that. My reasoning, though, was multifaceted. I decided to be naked in the show because it would help me strategically that every camera person, every single one of them were men, and they were all straight men. Not one of them had any interest in following my ass around with a camera. So they literally went in the opposite direction for a long time. And during that time when they weren't there, I was able to sit in the jungle next to other people having conversations. I was able to sneak up on people and find out what was going on. I was kind of innocuous. People left me alone because I was naked. That really, really helped my game. It was also 110 degrees and you were wet all the time. So while all the other guys got crotch rot, jock itch, I didn't. I was dry and healthy and that kind of thing. So you're correct. It was also something that had people a little off guard. Like, what do you do with this guy? But we're on a deserted island in the South China Sea. Nobody's around. I knew the network is CBS. They're certainly not going to show anything. So I went with it for all those reasons, and it paid off. Producers weren't supposed to interfere with us. And Mark gave an interview with me and Probst at the Paley Center sometime after the show aired, talking about how he didn't want to interfere. People came to him telling him that I was naked. And one day, particularly my birthday, that I had planned to spend the entire day naked, when he had all kinds of people scheduled to be on the island to see the challenge and reporters, etc. And Mark says in the interview that he told them not to say anything. But this one particular producer came over and was so angry and threatening me and saying, "Don't you realize you're not going to get any airtime?" Which solidified it for me. I'm going to be naked. I didn't care. He thought I was one of the kids like Jenna or Sean, the Alphabet Strategy, who wanted the airtime. They wanted the fame. I had no interest in it. I wanted the money. So I didn't care one lick about the idea that they wouldn't use me much or I wouldn't get much airtime. So I continued to be naked when I wanted to, just because of their attempts to interfere with my being naked, even though they say afterwards that they never did. And there are many examples of that. It was their first time, and so they interfered. I played two games. I played a game in which my competitors were the other participants, and I played a game in which my competitors were the staff and producers behind the show.
So you're playing this game, you're doing all these tactics. Were you surprised you won? By the end, spoiler alert, Richard wins, and And easily the best tribal council I think the show's ever had, thanks to Sue and Kelly and the whole thing. Just, I remember it. I'll never forget that show. I watched it with my family. It was just such shocking television. Like, how did they let you win? Like, did you have any sort of, was that surprise to you? Like, share your thoughts on the sort of the final tribal council where they did reveal that you were the $1 million winner.
So how did they let me win, you say? Oh, they did anything but let me win. Basically, it came down to them desperately wanting Rudy to win. But there's much that happened that isn't in the public knowledge that really interfered with everything that took place at the end. First, I caught them cheating. Kelly had been being fed the entire game. That's how she won those last 5 challenges in a row. She'd been sharing the food with Sue. I didn't know that until Sue gave me a letter Kelly had written to her, asking her to, forgive her for because Kelly knew that Sue perceived her as having shifted her allegiance. And was really angry. That's why Sue gave me the letter. But I caught Kelly getting food from the staff, and I followed her and saw where she kept other food, her peanut butter, all this stuff. And then I stopped the show because I refused to continue with it being unfair, the way I looked at it, with some participants being fed.
Did you tell the other castaways this too?
So I told Jeff Probst first. Probst acted very, very upset that could possibly be going on, and promised he would take care of it immediately. And he didn't. He did nothing. He said nothing. And the game kind of continued for the rest of that day, etc. I told him out on the boat when I was brought out by Sean, whose father was there to have brunch or breakfast as a reward. And I got angry. I got really upset that nothing had been done about it. So when I realized Probst wasn't going to do anything about it, I told producers, that's it. I refuse to film anymore. We're not going to continue until this is handled. And Jeff didn't come out, but Mark Burnett and Craig Pelagian, the 2 executive producers, came out. And herein starts much of the real problems in my life. So they were playing good cop, bad cop. Mark was really acting angry and confronting me with, who do you think you are? This is a lifelong dream of mine. You're not going to ruin it. Trying to affect me as if I didn't have enough self-esteem to realize I didn't do anything. And I made it clear to them that none of these tactics were going to work. Anyway, lots happened in that exchange on the beach. Finally, we decided to proceed. Mind you, Kelly had been being fed. She'd been sharing that food with Sue. None of the rest of us had any food that I'm aware of. And we went on with them still in the game, and me just feeling confident and determined to do as much as I could to get all the way through. One of the most powerful decisions I ever made, and I think it had an incredible impact on the game, came toward the end when there were 3 of us holding a poll, Rudy, Kelly, and I. And I thought through with everything I had in me what made the most sense. And when I was ready and decided to remove my hand from the poll and explain to the other 2 why they had no choice other than to take me to the end, Jeff Probst had been a little bit away from the poll and came so angrily. This is what people don't understand about the impact of the people behind the game. He was furious. He, again, who didn't understand the game, and I still don't think he understands it as well as people think he does just because he's exposed to it. So you're not playing, you're not in it. And as a host, yeah, he's a great host, but he interfered in a way that he shouldn't have. And his anger about my doing that, and what do you think you're doing, and how dare you? And he just was furious. I get it, he's human, he can't contain himself sometime, but it's evidence of something that continues to this day, where his ego is so overinflated and he's so overinvolved and so thinking that he knows what's best, that he misses the point of what viewers love about the game and the realness of it, the allowing us to be us, to do what we would do and have what would happen. I'd already done all the thinking about what would happen. I knew what would happen when I removed my hand from the pole. And I was right. Kelly did last longer than Rudy, and Kelly had to take me to the end because she had no chance whatsoever against Rudy.
You're absolutely right. The realness of the game is what makes it work. And if we had just put Rudy to win, it would have been, I loved Rudy, but that moment where Rudy let go of the pole was heartbreaking. That was the real moment that the show got. And the fact that Jeff and the producers didn't realize that's why we were engaged, because even they couldn't control this TV show. This was real life and real people that's what made it so real and amazing. And the fact that you won, and then Sue's speech, the whole thing, you couldn't have scripted this. I don't care how good Mark or Jeff were. There was no way to script it. That's why I always tell people, go watch Survivor Season 1. It set the tone for everything that came forward. And I don't think it's ever been matched because of that. They couldn't control it. They created a social experiment that went wild.
You couldn't have scripted it. You can't control it. And unfortunately, to this day, particularly since Jeff has become executive producer, they're attempting more and more and more still to control it. And they're undermining the show's success in some very, very powerful ways. They're taking away from what we viewers love about the show. It's sad to me.
You've already mentioned him a few times, and I want to get to it because you're being very vocal against Jeff on your YouTube channel here. It's a choice that you're making. I admire you making it because it seems like you just don't care anymore. It seems to me then you're done with the show. I mean, I can't imagine they're going to invite you back given all this sort of these charges. And let's step back a minute too. You saying that they cheated, you saying that is a very liable statement to make. CBS could easily come at you if they weren't assured that they wouldn't be found guilty. I don't believe they would risk those shenanigans to be out there if there wasn't clearly a way to prove, well, he's telling the truth.
It's not a question, Andy. They cheated. They know they cheated. They were very, very heavily involved in that show. I think in the second and third thereafter, they tried to be a little less hands-on, but the producers are involved in ways that they shouldn't be. And it's too bad. And Jeff's influence now, Jeff wasn't as involved then in altering what happens, but he is now. The way he handled season 39 was abhorrent, but I'm ahead of myself. So yes, in the early seasons, they were more involved than they should have been. There's nobody who could question the cheating that went on that I caught and stopped the game. All the producers knew about it. I refused to continue. I have the names of the people who were giving the food to Kelly that she then shared with Sue. It's just not questionable. Do they like that? No. I'm sure they hate that. Have they tried to hide it this whole time? Sure. They don't want it talked about, but it's nothing I have refrained from talking about. I've just not had people interested in sharing the whole story. The media is beholden to CBS in a way that the public doesn't understand. CBS, being such an enormous company with such incredible ratings for Survivor, wanted Us Weekly, People, etc., to report in the way that they do, and they manipulate them brilliantly. They allow the reporters onto the island only if they agree to sign these long contracts prohibiting certain things being talked about. So many reporters would have had an opportunity to explore this with me. It was brought out in court during the whole tax evasion charges that I faced. But publicly, it's not something that's been addressed. And the idea of what goes on behind the scenes is not something that people talk about. Mark Burnett promised that we were family. He came up to me at the 10-year reunion and he said he's so sorry for what happened to me and that if he ever could do anything for me. And I reached out for help a little after that, and he not only ignored it and refused to do it, he prevented his ex-wife, who's a friend of mine, from doing it, from helping me. It's a very, very sad situation. Here's what happens. People in power somehow just stop caring about what's ethically good, who the people under them are. While they're in that, and while I'm helping them make the show what it was, I'm everything. The second that's over and they're on to the next, Mark Burnett, it's a little bit of ADD. Mark's got attention deficit disorder in the way that he just moves from one to the next. All the kudos in the world for his successes. He's a sophisticated person with complicated issues. Jeff Probst is not so sophisticated, and he's not a good person. And so that's how they differ. And as Jeff Probst has gained power, his power is undermining what was good about the game itself, about the show that the viewers love.
It's sad to hear all that, and but there's more to the story that I hope people will stay tuned and understand why Richard feels this way. Obviously, the cheating in itself is pretty bad. But before we there's a lot to handle. We're going to get to it all. But before we even get there, why did you come back then for AllStars? Given this, was this stuff you figured out later? Some would say, well, then why, if you knew all this then, why even come back? You did come back for AllStars, and you were voted out pretty early on as a returning winner. Tell us about that decision to come back.
Yeah, so that was an easy decision for me. I came back on AllStars for the same reason that I watched the show today. I love the game. I appreciate the fans, the folks who love the game the way I do, who communicate with me, particularly now that social media enables us to have these exchanges and conversations about how the game is valuable in ways that we weren't able in the first season. There was no such thing as Twitter then, so now I'm really involved with people in honest ways about what unfolds in the game. As the game devolves as a result of Jeff's involvement, it's sad to me. So that's part of why I'm talking out now.
Well, can I step in though? How do you know he's so involved? Just to play devil's advocate and defend Jeff, who I like as a host. Why do you say he's so involved now, but you're not there? Is that fair for you to say?
That is fair to say that I'm not there, but I very much know what his involvement is. I've been in touch with the people behind the scenes, some of whom I can't name, from the time that I was on the show. In addition, I'm in touch with the players for every season all the way through. The players somehow, once they understand how little they're cared about by CBS or Probst or Mark Burnett, they've reached out to me. And my story about having caught them cheating in the first season is just the ridiculous tip, the tiniest tip of the iceberg. So many people have been abused unnecessarily by the folks behind the scenes that they reach out and talk to me about how to handle it, how to manage it, how to deal with what takes place afterwards. Everyone involved with the show, all the people there know that nothing happened between Sue Hawk and I that was untoward or that had anything to do with sexual harassment. Yet given the Me Too movement now, Jeff is using coded language and tossing out a dog whistle to scapegoat me, saying that's part of the reason I'm not on Survivor 40. He's claiming that Survivor's a family show and I don't fit in anymore. He's outright lying. It's a blatant, outright lie. Not only in season 8 was there nothing that was my fault to do with that interaction. That was 100% Sue coming toward me, and I never touched her. They all know that. We watched it from 4 camera angles. In addition, Jeff intentionally, I guess, that's my thought now, called me out in a challenge when Rob and I were on a balance beam. Rob is his very close friend and buddy who he takes care of behind the scenes in ways that would bother any objective viewer if they knew about them. And Jeff has since admitted that and talked about it publicly, but nobody's ever connected Jeff's connection with Rob and the possibility that miscall as a supposed referee was intentional. It just so happens, it looks coincidentally, during this interaction with Sue that they made through editing look salacious.
I do want to interject to just sort of point out, focusing on this cheating aspect, because it's a big claim, and I'm not saying you're a liar. I'm not saying it's not true, no. But does the game's contract allow them to do whatever they want? Is there some sort? Can you clarify on sort of what you sign, like? Because there's certain quiz show laws, right, that prohibits producers from actually stepping into shows. Does Survivor have one of those clauses, or are they allowed to produce a reality show and do whatever they want?
No, worse. Not only do those quiz show clauses require them to do certain things, in fact, what they did was try to fake it once I caught them cheating. So, for example, they're required by law since the 50s, that quiz show controversy that you bring up, to have what's called a representative of standards and practices on site anytime there is a competition happening. And they didn't. And they just absolutely ignored it. I even contacted the FCC and communicated that they did not have them there. I have all those communications with the FCC to prove that, and that they never did anything about it. But what they did was they had Craig Pelagian, the co-executive producer of the first 3 seasons of Survivor, claim that he was the representative of standards and practices for CBS. That's not possible, by the way. That's not objective. That's not legally acceptable. And so they simply just chose not to have that representative there. And I think they probably still don't. The show was so loved, the power behind it, the money behind it, as it became so instantly successful with 54 million viewers, prevented them from doing the right thing. It prevented them from supporting me and just talking about how things unfolded. And it led to, I guess, what you talk about, my being canceled. It's cancel culture in its purest form, I think.
So let's get back then to AllStars. You came back. You chose to come back to AllStars because you're a fan of this game. During that series, you did one of my favorite moments where you grabbed a shark with your bare hands. And now, knowing your marine biology background, it all makes more sense why you knew all of that. But the show, you were sadly kicked out pretty early. But the episode 5 of that season of AllStars, there's a moment you guys are walking around planks to sort of win this challenge, and you decide mid-challenge, take off your pants. I saw it as a smart move because no one was going to want to bump into you, and it was all about sort of crisscrossing people and then pushing each other off into a lake, for those who haven't seen it. And there was a moment in that scene where you run across Sue Hawk from season 1, who, let's be clear, voted for you to win $1 million. And from everything I've read, you two were close, were friends. She comes a certain way that she didn't need to go to sort of walk by you. Tell me, let me tell you how I saw it, and then you can correct me, Richard. She comes by this sort of plank that she didn't need to go by, and you're standing there clearly in the way, naked. And as she's sort of walking by you, playfully like, "Ooh, you want some of this?" Jokingly to her, she seems to be laughing and saying, "No, no, haha." She grabs you, and then sort of gross. Even Jeff at that point goes, "Guys, it's like enough. Move on. No one cares. You guys move on to your business. We move on with the show." Then the next day, after you're after you're removed from the island, you are then, Sue, out of nowhere, gives this big, long speech about how she was violated, Jeff, and does this whole moment. This was, what year was this? 2005, 4? Obviously, 2004, gives this big speech that she was violated by you in this moment. And I remember this vaguely. It wasn't as big of a deal back then, but this is an important part to talk about because it'll play to a reason why you weren't in the future All-Star edition that they're doing now, that I want to sort of make sure we're doing this chronologically. So that moment plays a key part in this history of telling the story. Let's talk about that moment, because everything I've seen from that moment, it seems like you both were playfully involved in banter. I didn't see you thrust yourself on her. She's clearly walking by you. She's choosing to walk by you. She grabbed you. Yet this moment was blown up by her the next day on the show to say she was violated by you. Can you elaborate or sort of share your thoughts? Is that a correct summary of what happened?
Yeah. So your setup was very important in that you accurately describe what you as viewers were shown. But interestingly, almost ironically even, you talk about how neither of us were violating the other, or how we were both kind of being playful. It's not what you saw, and it's not what people think from the way they edited it. I felt uncomfortable. I'm the one who wondered what's going on here. And so not only was it she took a board that you said, a pathway that she didn't need to, the pathway she took was intentionally in the opposite direction of where she was supposed to be going. She was almost done and off the game, out of that challenge. Her teammates were telling her, "Hey, what are you doing?" She intentionally turned around and traveled back toward me, quite a distance, out of the way of complete opposite direction of where she was supposed to go to be out of the challenge, to interact with me, to engage me for some unknown reason. In the moment, that's exactly what I did. What you saw, put my hands up, asking her, "What do you do? What on earth?" I had no idea what was happening or why she was coming that way. I never touched her. I never went toward her in the game. That's all baloney.
Hold on, because I rewatched it last night. I watched what we saw, so I want to clarify two things, because you said I can ask anything, and this is one that's important. We clear up. You did say you want some of this. You want some of this, and I took it as playful. I'm not calling you out. You took that, and secondly, you're saying, "Oh, well, she touched you. You were naked. Why'd you make yourself naked if you were going to be?" This idea of you were uncomfortable feels a little bit careful. Of like, well, come on, you put yourself in the situation, didn't you?
Great question. I did put myself in that position, and intentionally, so that people would give me space. Any kind of advantage you could get in the game. Remember, this is 2003. We're filming. It aired in 2004. There were no rules about not being naked. They loved that I was naked in the first show. It led to the 54 million viewers. So this was, if anything, celebrated that this was a part of my game. To be clear, I chose a kilt to wear on the show and talked with producers about why it would be so easy off when I was going into a challenge, when I was swimming, whenever I wanted, I could just pop the buttons and boom, the kilt drops. So everyone knew that was a part of my gameplay. That's not the part that I'm talking about being uncomfortable in this challenge. I was uncomfortable about what was happening because I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense in the sense of the game. It didn't make sense from strategy. I had no idea what she was doing, and she had an odd look on her face. So I was uncomfortable about what was going on, not about being naked. And I didn't care that she touched me, but I never touched her. She touched me around the waist, like you said. My discomfort was with what the hell is going on? How do I deal with this? And you're right. I put up my hands. What the hell? What did I say?
Yeah, you said you want some of this, which might have been done out of nervousness about sort of, I don't know, but yeah, that's what you said.
Yeah, you want some of this, meaning, what are you coming toward me for? What are you coming at me naked? It was just an off the cuff comment about what was happening that I didn't understand. Even that can't be misconstrued as sexual harassment. That's got nothing to do. Sexual harassment requires intention. Sexual harassment requires, unless it's something over the top and absurd, a discomfort that the person needs to express is uncomfortable for them. This is the exact opposite. This is Sue coming to me for no reason and putting her hands on me. My reaction to that cannot be construed as sexual harassment in the real world. I get how viewers are confused because of the edit that they saw, but regardless, we all, Sue, her lawyer, us, everybody, all of the people behind CBS watched all 4 cameras, unedited, no blue dots, and I've never touched her. I had nothing to do with that. CBS's lawyers, made that clear and showed everyone that I did nothing in the instigating of that interaction. So that's all I mean about being uncomfortable. It was so wrong. It was so odd. It was so not part of the challenge that none of us understood what was happening. But me, being the target of her coming back toward me, was more confused than anyone, because I needed to get to that end. And there was no reason. That's not part of the challenge to block other people. You can't do that. I could just push her off if I wanted to. So I don't understand. I didn't understand any of that then. But what people don't know is that Sue had told me and others that she knew she couldn't win, and she was going to find a way to extort CBS. She wanted the money. That's just something that I recalled later. I never even knew that an incident had occurred that would be problematic for months. So I was, as you said, voted off later on that night because Jeff inaccurately called me out as having lost the challenge when I didn't. So then I was voted out and never knew anything had happened. Had no idea that there was any issue whatsoever. And there was lots that went on behind the scenes. You can talk to the other players and what happened with producers, and Sue changing her mind about what she was saying, what she wanted to do. And even after the scene that you described in which she said, "Jeff, I was violated," in the same kind of a speech that she gave in the first season about the rats and the snakes and why she thought I should be voted the winner, she had that same tone and demeanor with respect to this speech. But then after the speech, changed her mind and asked to stay. And all the producers had to go around to the players and ask them if they wanted to allow her back in. And to a person, they all said, "No effing way." And they didn't let her change her mind and come back into the game. So I was gone and didn't know any of that. I didn't learn any of that was even taking place or had taken place or was being talked about until it aired.
To also add some context, both Lex and Kathy have since said comments about that sort of experience and how nothing happened. It was very odd. And you're right. The speech almost felt like Sue was trying to one up her last speech in a way. Yeah. And I don't say that, again, I don't know Sue. I liked her as a character. She was great television. But there was something off about it. And you could tell even from Jeff and everybody in that sort of moment of like, what are we talking about? What? Okay. And then even Jeff doesn't know what to do. Do we continue? Do we play? They're like, let's just play. Who cares? It was a very thrown away moment that seemed to be, just a blip in the Survivor radar, but obviously had serious ramifications later. Richard, there's so much more to talk about because all of this plays into why you aren't on Winners at War. Obviously, we need to get to the tax evasion stuff, your time in prison, and just how you got through all this, your moments of hugging the cactus. If it's okay with you, I'd like to split this into 2 interviews because I don't really want to cut a lot of the stuff. As a Survivor fan, it's a lot of fascinating to me. So why don't let's pause here. We're going to pick up the rest of all of this in the next episode of Hugging the Cactus. I don't mean to tease you, but I do have to deliver a certain amount of time per episode. So stay tuned for part 2 of my exclusive interview here with Richard Hatch. We're going to get into tax evasion. We're getting to why he's not on Winners at War and so much more. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to subscribe to Richard Hatch's YouTube channel as well, YouTube Richard Hatch, and stay tuned for part 2. You can hear more stories like these by supporting us on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you find your podcasts. Please go leave us a good review and rating to help others find us. And if you know of a story that is worth sharing on this series, please reach out to me, Andy Signor, on social media, or visit Hugging the Cactus on Facebook. I'd also like to thank all of our Kickstarter donors. I couldn't have done this without you. If you'd like to support this series to keep it going, you can visit uncancelled.com. See you next episode.